Hello and welcome to the annual WriteHive conference. This year is packed with tons of great sessions for writers, writer professionals in the publishing industry. WriteHive is a nonprofit serving the writer community with free and inclusive resource, event, programming, connections, and more. The 2024 collection will do this session, fashion and worldbuilding. I'm here with three amazing panelists, Olga Ponjee, Ilene, and Keshe Chow. Hi, everyone. First, I will ask each panelist to present themselves, starting with Olga.
Hello, I'm Olga Ponjee. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm a screenwriter there and a novelist. Well, you may not have heard of any of my works because I write mainly in Dutch. But last year I published a series called Oneindig, Infinity. It's a series of queer novellas. And 3 years ago I won the Dutch and Flemish award for best screenplay, not yet made into a movie, about the jazz music scene in Holland where I grew up in. So I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. Emma?
So I am Emma Ilene. I'm the author of Dagger of the Tsar. Dagger of the Tsar is an Anastasia Romanoff-inspired YA fantasy. So a girl has a dormant power, it gets exposed, and she gets brought to the imperial court and all of its secrets to try to survive amongst her greatest enemies.
Thank you. Keshe?
Hi, I'm Keshe Chow. I'm an author of YA fantasy. My debut novel, The Girl with No Reflection, which is, hang on, that side, is coming out in August with Delacorte Press, Penguin Random House. And it's about a dark mirror world in which the reflections are actually sentient and have been cursed to mimic us. And basically, it's about what happens when they decide to suddenly stop.
Thanks, panelists. So now we will start with the question. First of all, how does fashion impact the world building of our story? Emma?
Fashion, it affects stories from the ground up. For me, my world is set in a fantasy Russia. So I took major inspiration from Slavic fashion, early 19th century and beyond. So when I was building my world, I was definitely thinking about, okay, what is influencing that? And fashion influences cultures we can see around us and also in our fantasy world. So when I was thinking about what would my characters wear, what colors symbolize them? What colors are they drawn to? You see a color, is a character wearing that a lot? Is there a reason? So fashion has a great impact on stories.
Thank you. Olga?
I don't think it doesn't have to, but I think fashion is one of the many tools you can use, just like dialogue in novels or music or color in movies. And I like it because it's a very versatile tool. Just before this panel, I was trying to think of the many ways I use fashion myself. So here's some ideas where I use it for. I think it's a great tool to show how your world works. It's just the outside world. A really obvious example I was thinking of is, of course, The Handmaid's Tale, where they use both the dresses people are wearing and the color to signify their class and their function in the society. But you can also use it in ways like how a character sees themselves. One of my favorite books is Gormenghast by Mervyn Peake. There's a character there called Irma Prunesqualler, and she's very vain. So she dresses not like the woman she is, but the woman she would like to be and like to be seen by the others. But you can also use it to reveal something a character doesn't know about themselves. Also, a very obvious example I was thinking of is Luke Skywalker from, of course, Star Wars, who's wearing white in the beginning. And of course, Luke doesn't know he's the good guy going to turn into this evil villain. So he hasn't chosen this color for himself, but it's used to sort of signify and let people know that he's the hero of the story. And you can even make it an arc. Luke goes from white to black, of course. But I was always also thinking about Our Flag Means Death, the pirate series. I was reading a couple of days ago about somebody who was talking about delayering of the character. It's about Blackbeard, the very cool pirate who sort of discovers all these feelings in himself. And the more he discovers about himself, the less layers he's wearing. So he begins with all these layers and leather and things. And the more soft he becomes, the less layers he's wearing. So that's also, clothing can also be used, I think, as an arc. And of course, there's also, I use it in this book I've written. It's I use also clothing as sort of a plot device. This is about a necklace that people pass along, and everyone who wears the necklace sort of gets empowered by the symbol on the necklace, which I stole a bit from the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, of course. So there, the clothing itself is a plot item. Also, things like Venus in furs. There, this fur clothing that the woman is wearing sort of makes her this powerful dominatrix that she is. So these are just a few examples, I think, as standardized lists, I think you can use, but it's just to give you some ideas for the things you can use fashion for.
Thank you. Keshe?
Yeah, so similar to Emma, I think that fashion in world building is just a part of creating a really three-dimensional immersive world. And I also had inspiration for my book from a different culture. So I'm Chinese Australian, so I took inspiration from Imperial China, which is really fun. But at the same time, I didn't want to be too sort of slavishly adhered to like one era. So I basically just took things from like all different eras and different parts of the culture and mishmashed them together. And there are also things that I didn't really want to strictly adhere to. So for example, you know, for a long time in Imperial China, women underwent foot binding, and I felt like that was not really something I wanted to depict in my book. I felt like it would be overly restrictive to my female characters, and you know, my book is very much a feminist fantasy. So, and I think it can be done really well. So, for example, in Iron Widow, you know, that they do depict those sort of things, but it was just something that I wanted my characters to be able to freely run and kick people in their face, basically.
Right. Next question. What is your advice for showing fashion in a story without making an expository paragraph? Keshe?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that sometimes expository paragraphs can be really effective. You know, there are some books where description is part of the prose. You know, it's part of like just the texture of the book. But I find that if I want to sort of incorporate things into the text more seamlessly, I will just depict the characters kind of interacting with their clothes more. So like, you know, they might fiddle with the cuff. So for example, in the opening scene of my book, the main character is wearing like one of those really like long sleeved sort of draping hanfus, and she basically like almost trips over it as she's like kind of running away from something that she's scared of. So that sort of thing, or just you know, commenting on colors because of the contrast with, you know, the background or something like that, or the scenery. You know, something might really stand out. So someone wearing red might be like really sort of prominent against like a, you know, gray, greeny sort of landscape or something like that. So yeah, just kind of like commenting on it in terms of the characters interacting with their clothing and things like that. So, you know, so I guess, yeah, like kicking off shoes when they have to run and that sort of thing.
Thank you. Emma?
To kind of build on what Keshe was saying, in the opening paragraph of my book, my main character, she's a thief. And so part of her fashion is it's a tool for her. She doesn't have a lifestyle where it is something that she uses to show off her own power. It's necessary. So she uses it to put stolen things in. So when you're thinking about fashion, I would definitely incorporate it with your characters, because that's some of the most memorable ways to think about it. Another one of my characters, she always is wearing gloves. So I have scenes of her just very carefully taking it off when I want to draw some pause or attention to it. So I think associating fashion with characters and highlighting it through character interactions with fiddling with the cuff or tripping on the hem of a skirt is a great way to do that.
Thank you. Olga?
Well, I think you're supposed to say, write it as an action, or, I don't know, single out the most meaningful items and describe those. But I've been teaching screenwriting for 10 years and writing in general. And I think just do whatever suits your style, which is also, I think, a good fashion advice. But really, I think just experiment with it. I love text that single out pieces of clothing, a certain scarf or a weird hat that somebody's wearing. But if you can pull off lavish descriptions of ball gowns and clothing, I don't know, just do it. And just have fun and see what suits you. I was a while back, I was sort of obsessed with shoes. So I was looking a lot at shoes people were wearing, because I don't know, footwear tells a story in itself. And I was thinking, what if you wrote a story only describing people's characters according to the shoes they're wearing? So I don't know, just see what suits you and experiment with what works for your story. I don't think you can go wrong there.
All right. Next question. How do you harmonize fashion with other elements of worldbuilding, whether it's climate, the social issues, functionary, the function of the clothing, etc.? Starting with Emma.
So part of fashion with climate is mine is a fantasy Russia. I did set my book happening in the winter months, so we are dealing with a colder climate. So part of that's very intrinsic in Russian culture with imperial court fashion was furs and very heavy velvet. So I incorporate that into the fashion. Also, some of the court gowns, they have very long sleeves and very, very long trains. So just making sure that was present too really helps kind of set it apart versus what you see, especially in European fantasy and fashion. It's just a completely different scope over there. So yeah, just bringing that in to reflect temperature outside, what your character is wearing every day with the elements that they're interacting with.
Thank you. Keshe?
Yeah, so I think definitely paying attention to the weather and climate of your worlds is really important. So in my book, I have the real world and I have the mirror world, and I made it so that the mirror world is actually like a few degrees cooler than the real world. So when the character goes into the mirror world, she finds that she's quite cold, and there's a scene where one of the characters who, she ends up falling for ends up bringing her a cloak, and so it's just kind of like a little, oh, that's really sweet, and brings her slippers and things like that. So I think definitely paying attention to the climate, what the season is and things like that makes it a really sort of immersive experience, and just makes it more, I guess, like accurate to a real world. And I think that social status as well is really important. So in this book, obviously, they're all kind of like nobility. So they're all wearing like really rich textured fabrics. Like it's all sort of like silk and satin and like golden embroidery. And there's, like more dressier outfits where, there's like gems and things. The actual sort of emperor and empress have like headdresses that are really ornate and like full of like glittering gemstones and things like that. Whereas my next book that's coming out, my next YA fantasy that's coming out in 2025, the main character is actually like from like quite a low socioeconomic background. So her outfits are made out of like coarse cotton and things like that. It's not going to be sort of like the silk and satin that you would traditionally associate with like sort of wealth. And so I guess like I draw a bit of inspiration from the real world in that regard. Like I sort of, take what would be fabrics and things that would be in our world and our historical sort of details, and and then kind of use that as inspiration for what I put into our my fantasy worlds.
Thank you. Olga?
Well, I think environment, of course, influences what you will and can wear. I'm from the Netherlands, and if you would put me next to someone from Italy, I think you could immediately tell the difference between us. And this is just about European clothes, of course, but in Holland, our clothing, for example, is very practical, and it has to be warm and it has to be rain resistant. And we cycle a lot, of course. We cycle so much every day. Our trousers get damaged in the bum area first. So our clothing is very practical. And I'm part of a few sewing circles on social media. And there's always people who will say, I'm going to the Netherlands. What cute winter clothing should I be bringing? And the advice is always the same. Just go for a full body rain suit. And you see it in our hair and our makeup as well. It's a lot more toned down because your eyeshadow will end up on your chin anyway if you're cycling in the rain. Also, I think we're not very, a very refined country culturally, and try to hide this by pretending we don't care what we're wearing. So, but all these elements, I think it tells a whole story about a nation and its people, just by the way we look and the clothes we're wearing. And I think it's nice to think about fashion in that way. Just what story does it tell about the climate we live in, but also the activities we do every day, and of course, yeah, the clothing we can afford, because we can afford the whole full body rain suit. So so that's I think that's all things you could think about.
Next question. What are your main inspirations for the use of fashion in your story? Olga?
I think like a lot of people, I got interested in fashion by movies. And I think like all people who are as old as me from this side of the world, those movies were things like The Matrix and Moulin Rouge and Marie Antoinette. And I just looked at the costumes in those movies and thought, wow, that's so cool. I want to look like that. So I began making those costumes. And by making those clothes, I got interested in historical fashion as well, because I thought, what can we learn from the way people used to make clothes, and also how does it feel to wear those particular clothes? And so, and I was interested because a lot of the time people would say things like, oh, I hate how square women look in Tudor clothes or something like that. It's not pretty at all. And but if you make these costumes and put them on, you realize that our modern definition for women's clothes, like we must look pretty and sexy but not too sexy, is extremely limited. And how empowering some of these historical garments that don't look pretty actually feel when you put them on. And that's got me really fascinated by not only the limitless of our modern clothes, but also by how smart some fashion decisions of the past were. So I began making those clothes, and also not only like the cool costumes, but also just everyday clothes from people from the past. And I realized they were a lot more practical than a lot of my modern polyester clothes. And they made me feel different about my body, because they were, I don't know, a lot less revealing, but I don't know, I felt more powerful in them. And of course, they play with silhouette manipulation a lot more. So you can look whatever you want to look like. So I made all these historic clothes, then moved on to modern women's clothes to see what this felt like. Then I got into drag. I got into men's clothing, and I don't know, it brought up so many feelings, the way people from the past dressed, but also how in this modern age we're supposed to look and what we can and cannot wear. And this is just, of course, white European clothes, because I'm sort of now looking beyond the borders and seeing, wow, there's so much more out there. I'm really interested in those areas, but that's a new thing to explore. So that's mainly where I get my inspiration, is just by making the clothes and wearing them and realizing how this can be another element of storytelling.
Thank you. Keshe?
So yeah, as I said before, I used Imperial China for a lot of my fashion inspiration, sort of tweaking it so that it was more functional in the story. One thing that I have to sort of consciously write into my stories that are inspired by Chinese culture is that I have to really consciously write in that my characters take off their shoes when they go inside, because that's something that, you know, in a lot of Asian cultures, I'm sure there's a lot of other cultures where this happens as well, but in Asian culture, it's quite taboo to wear shoes in the house. And when I used to grow up reading fantasy, like, I mean, they're just like trudging through like castles and like their houses and things with their boots on, like, yeah. And you never see them like taking their shoes on and off. But yeah, so I actually, in my first drafts, I don't even think about shoes, but then when I go back and edit, I have to sort of think, okay, so these characters, they're like Asian coded, so what are they going to do? They're going to, like, as soon as they walk in, they're going to take off their shoes. And this got cut, but at one stage I had you know, there was a bit of an enemies to lovers arc in my book, and I had one scene where the main character like actually puts her shoes on and then like walks off the carpet like her enemy, and she's like taking perverse pleasure in that. But yeah, I ended up having to cut that just because I was like my word count was getting quite high, but I had a lot of fun with that. So yeah, I guess just using inspiration from my own culture and my own experiences, and then trying to incorporate that into sort of like this fantasy world can be fun, because it just adds that extra element of authenticity. Because yeah, like, you know, a lot of Asian people will be like horrified by the shoes.
Thank you. Emma?
Yeah, so what I mentioned already is that my story is heavily inspired off of Imperial Russia. So historical inspiration was so huge on this story. I kind of incorporate different eras from the 1600s to basically the early 1900s. Was my main focus. I also had a really fun shoe scene that hasn't been cut yet. We'll see if it still makes it. But my character takes off her shoe and throws it at someone. So, which, I mean, I had a lot of fun playing with social classes, because she is raised not as nobility or anything. So, you know, you don't see other characters in my book taking off their shoe and throwing it at someone when they're frustrated, but she did.
Next question. Next question. What are the best example of showing passion in a story? Keshe?
I mean, I read a lot of diverse literature, diverse fantasy, and I think that there's just so many examples now. I mean, I think we all grew up reading, you know, the typical kind of women wearing tunics and men wearing tunics and things, and leather pants and boots like The Witcher. But yeah, I think that now with more sort of diverse fantasy coming out, I think we can sort of see, you know, really rich kind of worlds that are inspired by lots of different cultures. I particularly love one of my friends, Nisha J. Julie, wrote a series called I think it's Heart of Night and Fire is the first book. And I think it's a 4-book series that's got a few more coming out. But yeah, her world is inspired by a South Asian sort of like Indian type culture, and she's just writes the most beautiful descriptions of like fashion, you know, clothing and the garments and the fabrics and things like that, as well as other things like food and stuff. But yeah, when I read that book, or read that series, like, I just thought it was just a beautiful example of really sort of incorporating a really rich tapestry of fashion into the text. So yeah, that's one of my favorites.
Thank you. Olga?
Well, there's a lot of examples. I think in books, my two favorites are the one I mentioned before, Gormenghast, and also Orlando by Virginia Woolf. Gormenghast is sort of a fantasy novel from the 1940s. It's basically a story about the nonsense of traditions. It's about a fantasy castle, and all these people live there, and they follow traditions that they don't know the origin of, but they have to every day. There's on every hour there's things they have to do, like I don't know, the ritual of the goldfish, where they have to walk 3 times around a pond or something, and all day they're busy doing these traditions, but nobody knows why they're doing it anymore. They just know that they have to do those things. And I love the way the clothes are described in those. I read it around the same time, a few years earlier than I saw The Matrix. And I was really, I don't know, I was so involved and immersed in this world. There's like these characters, they're as old as the castle. There's the servants. One of the servants is described as having this uniform that has been patched so many times that you can't see what's the fabric and what's the patches. There's the daughter of the Earl, who slouches and she wears dresses. They're always too big for her. They're always too big for her. There's the Earl's wife who hates the castle and the tradition and the monarchy. And she lives, I don't know, she's sort of a nature woman, lives with birds in her hair, and the cats in her are part of her dress. And it's really gothic, but also beautifully done in its descriptions. You can feel in the way these clothes are described how run down this place is. That once there was, I don't know, it was a sort of a glorious time, but it's the time is way past. So it's very Mervyn Peake really singles out things he describes about his clothes. It's very beautifully done. So and the other is Orlando by Virginia Woolf, and their clothing is part not so much of the decorum but of the theme. Orlando is an immortal nobleman who is later a noblewoman. And I love how clothing plays with gender in that story. So sometimes it's for a long time Orlando is sort of, I don't know, a bit androgynous, doesn't really care about, I don't know, how he's seen. He has a lot of freedom in his clothes, and then suddenly overnight in the 1700s, I think, he turns into a woman and has to wear women's clothes. And there's a beautiful line where he says that he never thought about his own sexuality, his own gender, until he suddenly has to put on all these skirts and layers and dresses, and that people are also relating to him differently just because the way he looks and dresses. So that's also, I don't know, it's very, Virginia Woolf also picks out beautiful elements to describe, but I love how these two books use clothing in a different way. Not so I thought if you're interested to looking what you can do with clothes, those are two really nice books to start with.
Thank you. Emma?
So yeah, growing up, a lot of fantasy I read was from white male authors. So it was kind of polarizing because I kind of grew up in this culture of women either are way too feminine, or they're not feminine enough, or they need to be masculine in order to be considered strong. And so one thing that I love about seeing diversity in books is seeing a wide range of fashion on a wide range of people. When you have princess characters, if they're wearing gowns, can they not also do amazing things and be considered very strong characters? Do they need to have masculinity in order to do that? Can they be more feminine? And I love seeing different femininity and masculinity expressed on men and female, because diverse cultures bringing in different representation is just like a great way to do that. You don't have to just follow the mold that we kind of grew up in.
All right. Next question. How did you use fashion to reveal information about your character? Keshe?
Yeah, so I mentioned this earlier, but I use fashion to reveal information about their social status. So and just things that they like. So yeah, I agree totally with Emma from the last question, and that I think that it's nice to see examples of female or female coded characters that do really love fashion, you know, because I think for a long time we had stories where it was kind of like the not like other girl, you know, like the main character's always like, oh yeah, I don't like that sort of silly female stuff. I don't like you know, I don't like gossiping and like, you know, court intrigue, and I'm just not going to be like that. But yeah, I think that you can have characters that just really, you know, that really love fashion and embrace their sort of like inner creative expression through their fashion, and I think that's really good. And I think similarly you can have characters that maybe aren't quite so able to stand up for themselves, and then they might get put into something or pressured to wear a certain sort of style to conform, and that can be a really sort of, you know, good way to expose what an inner character's world is like as well. And yeah, I think especially in you know, with the Chinese inspiration, fashion was extremely regimented for a lot of the time. Like, for example, only emperors and empresses were allowed to wear yellow for a long period of history. You know, there were codes in terms of like the embroidery. So the emperor would wear like a dragon motif on like their own robes, but no one else was allowed to wear them, like under pain of death. Like, you know, if you wore like yellow with like a dragon on it and you were not the emperor, you would like get into massive trouble. And similarly, all the other roles in the court had their own sort of colors. So, you know, there were certain like sort of roles in the court where they would wear like teal or red and that sort of thing. So it was kind of, I had to do a lot of research into sort of what happened over the course of Chinese history to try and sort of like make it you know, I guess authentic to a point. And then take that authenticity and then mix it up so that it was something that was completely my own.
Yeah, thank you. Emma?
Yeah, so to kind of build off Keshe, my book, it has magical orders. And so one thing I wanted to do with the fashion was to have strong color symbolism where there is court rules on who can wear what colors. You can't just wear this color, you can't just wear this color. So I was heavily looking at, especially Imperial Russia's court, because they had heavy gold embroidery. The Tsar and Tsarina had very specific crowns that only they could wear and no other one, no one else in the family could. So I was definitely thinking about, okay, what do the colors mean? What does it mean in terms of status? One thing that was really fun is I have a main character who doesn't know the color rules. So when she's coming into this world, she realizes, oh, you know what? The people wearing green, they're kind of mean, or oh, they're kind of respected here. Like I need to be on watch for that. And then I also had really fun when I write, I'm a very visual writer. I see everything kind of like a movie. So costumes come into that. So I think about, okay, what's the silhouette on this character? I have one character who wears very high necklines. It's just how she came to me. I have another character who loves fashion, over the top, crazy fashion. So she's always decked out to the nines. So that's just one thing that you can do to really tell a character apart.
Thank you. Olga?
I think this really comes back to your first question. And in the first place, realize what you want to use it for. So is it to show off a bit of world building information? Do you want it to sort of reveal a certain arc that somebody has to walk? Does it tie in with your theme? Is it a plot item? I think you can go many ways there and see for yourself how you can use fashion to sort of elevate these elements. And yeah, I think that's the answer for me.
All right, so that was all the question I have from our panelists today. before we wrap up, I will do a last checkup with our panelists to see if, first of all, they have any last advice to give to our viewers, and also if they want to plug anything they want to plug. Starting with Olga.
I think I would say one last piece of advice. If you can, I think what really helped me, what I talked about, is wearing the clothes you're describing. I see this a lot in historical fiction. The people are describing clothes and don't know how they work exactly. I think, of course, in European literature, there's a lot of things about stays and corsets, and it's also a lot of times it's used as a way to signify that women are oppressed. But that's not how corsets work. It's actually, I've worn them for years and even made them for pregnancy, to see how in pregnancy they made corsets. And it's actually a really useful item. If you don't want to use any kind of structural garment, that's also fine. But don't just I don't know. If you want to talk about these garments, I don't know, just put them on and put them on correctly. So you can I think sort of it gives that extra layer of knowing how garments work and feel and what they did for people, and that makes your story so much more believable and alive, I think.
Thank you. Keshe?
Yeah, so as I said, I have a book coming out in August, Delacourt. It's the girl, I always do that the wrong side, the girl with no reflection. It's coming out in the US and UK, Australia, and a bunch of other countries that I have yet to announce. So yeah, that love some pre-orders. I've got a website that's www.keshechow.com, and I'm on pretty much like most of the social platforms, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter/X as @KesheWrites. So yeah, love to connect with people and talk fashion. I love fashion. I don't get to wear enough nice clothing these days with 2 young kids, but yeah, love talking about it, love thinking about it, love writing about it. Thanks so much, Brad.
Finally, Emma.
So my book, Dagger of the Tsar, is coming out this October. Right here, not the final cover. The cover reveal is coming out very, very soon, though. Been having a lot of fun with the artist. Pre-orders will be launching soon as well. So I guess if you want those links, I'm Emma Ilene _ on all social media, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and that's it. Thank you so much, Brad. I love this panel, love fashion. I encourage everyone when they're writing, even if you don't think it's your thing, just check it out. Maybe it will inspire you.
Thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for watching this video. If you are interested, you can also look up from last year's conference, the panel about food in worldbuilding and season in worldbuilding on our YouTube channel. If you like, the panelists will be there in the chat to answer any of your questions. Other than that, happy rest of the day, and happy WriteHive 2024 for everyone.